Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and the guest this evening is the new Director of Opportunity, Access, and Equality for the Beverly School System, Dr. André Morgan. Welcome, Doc. How are you today?
I'm doing good, George. Many thanks. Great to see you, and thanks for extending an invitation for me to join you.
I almost introduced you as Doc, because you've got two PhDs. That's impressive.
Well, many thanks.
Quickly, what was your thesis about with the philosophy PhD?
So I did an experimental pilot study, and I looked at storytelling as a way to teach math to elementary school students.
Oh, that sounds interesting, because I got an interest in math myself. And you got your second one from Harvard, and that's on administration. What was that about?
That was in educational leadership.
Yeah.
And so my research revolved around personalized learning and the correlation to equity.
Okay, so that's about what you're doing now, isn't it?
Yeah, a direct correlation to what I'm doing now.
Yeah. So one of the things that showed up in the papers was that your position is funded by a grant.
Mm-hmm.
How long does the grant run for?
For 2 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2 years, you work yourself out of a job, or is that how it goes?
Well, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, I'll create the opportunity and create the need to continue that role.
Okay. The other thing that showed up is you were, I guess, first mentioned talking about opportunities to eliminate or reduce the amount of disparity between students, and the fancy word for it is lost it again. Oh yeah, there it is. Close achievement gaps. What's an achievement gap, and how do you measure it?
Well, an achievement gap is where we see disparities between how students are performing academically. There are a number of factors that impact achievement gaps. And according to national research, it includes race, gender, even upbringing. And so different factors that students come to school with, their experiences, their opportunities or lack thereof give creation to an opportunity and achievement gap.
So when you're measuring these achievement gaps, is it relative to the city, or is it relative to the state, or some national level that says this is what a fifth grader should be doing, and anybody that's not doing that well has got a negative achievement gap? Or how do you anchor it?
So there are a number of ways to anchor / measure performance among students, and that's one of the reasons why we get benchmark exams that are designed by the state. So our Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has set a baseline according to national standards in terms of what our students should be able to know when they graduate from high school. And it's not just the content piece, but how well are we preparing students for different pathways, whether they're college bound or whether they're going directly into the workforce. And so our goal, our mandate, if you will, is to make sure that students have what they need to be successful, which is the definition of equity. To your original question, how do we measure achievement gaps? We do that in a number of different ways. And so it's not one predicated way that deciphers whether achievement gaps exist or not. But we look at several measures, including testing scores, including curriculums, including student base and knowledge, what they're gleaning from their classes. All of these things go into our formula, if you will, for gauging the work that we need to do around this.
Well, when you started to talk about some of the things that influence the achievement gaps, you mentioned race and home upbringing and background. A lot of those things I don't think the school system can fix. So how do you overcome those kinds of background issues?
Well, I think you can do them in a number of different ways. And so it's really not about fixing more so than an opportunity to create awareness and an idea of what you can do to address some of the issues that are pervasive. I think I want to expand that out just a little bit to talk about what I do and then what brought me to the work, which will in part answer the question about how you fix it or whether you fix it or what's the baseline against that. And so in my role, I'm tasked to do a number of things. One is to lead and oversee pre-K through 12 opportunity and inclusion efforts to ensure that all students are provided equitable access to school offerings. Two, to assure that underengaged students and high need student subgroups have their language gaps addressed and are prepared and able to access higher level coursework and the expectations of the next grade level. Three, communicate, collaborate, and problem solve with a wide variety of constituents. And this includes our students and our families, administrators, school committee members, and community partners. Another part of my role is to ensure equitable access and inclusion for all students and families, and actively work to make certain that student populations are reflected really in a wide array of educational settings and in a variety of extracurricular and co-curricular programs. I further serve as a liaison to community groups and engage in advocating and promoting and securing the civil rights of all persons with an emphasis on students and families in the school system. I also review and advise on a variety of student services, and this includes anti-bullying, suicide prevention, truancy prevention and attendance, mental health, discipline, and parent education. I haven't forgotten that my question is, how do you fix it? I also work with building leaders to assess student incidents and troubleshoot parent and guardian concerns. I identify training necessary to remove bias in instruction and curriculum writing and revision. This is another area. Then preparing and conducting ongoing audits of district opportunity access and equity efforts. In fact, we've just undertaken our first equity audit for the district. In addition, I monitor suspension, detention, expulsion, arrest, dropout, and special education classification rates to ensure that there's no disproportionality in our system. And then lastly, I serve as the district civil rights and Title IX coordinator. And so this is assisting in implementing continuous program improvements. So that's a snapshot of what I do. I think that was important to lay out there as part of the response so that people understand the role. Now, let me tell you what brought me to the role, and then I'm going to address the question about how do you fix it? Because I don't really look at it as fixing it. I look at it as disrupting it. And disrupting is bringing an inherent awareness to some of the problems that have become pervasive in the system. How I came to this work is I started as a teacher, as a high school teacher. And, you know, in that role, it was challenging in a number of ways because I got to see a few things. And I walked into the classroom, you know, as a younger me, and I had this, I'm going to change the world through a classroom mindset. It was difficult on a number of levels because in that role, I saw the opportunity and achievement gaps that are so pervasive in our education system, a system that we've asked teachers to maintain and not disrupt in any way, shape, or form. And as I transitioned into school leadership roles, I realized that principals didn't have a way to think about cultural relevance. And they were expected to deal with this on top of all the other expectations of schooling. So now that I had seen it, I wanted to get a systemic look at the problem and then disrupt it. And in so doing, I realized that it wasn't just the teachers, it wasn't just the principals, it wasn't just the superintendents, it wasn't just the state, it was the system itself. And in this system, certain students just weren't going to rise up. And so I wanted to disrupt the system so that kids who look like me could see their own utopias, so they could feel belongingness and relevance, so they could see themselves represented in classrooms, so they could feel successful regardless of the color of their skin. So there'd be no colorism, no imposter syndrome, no self-hate. We could just be and learn and appreciate difference when we've been taught so ardently to fear it. And so as I begin looking at the system from one lens, I begin to recognize other perspectives. Students who don't speak English as a second language, as a primary language. I also saw students who had some type of disability. And it didn't mean that they were any less capable. They just happened to have an issue that other students do not. And then I saw students in poverty. who include the demographics I've just mentioned. So now you have students who have 2 strikes because they fall into 2 of these subgroups. And so what I think I'm supposed to do in my role, I'm not here to fix it. I'm here to disrupt it. And disruption is never easy because you always have to move in uncharted territory. And so to this idea.
How do you disrupt this Beverly system? How do you plan on disrupting the Beverly system to achieve these? You got an awful lot of stuff on your plate. That's an impressive list of to-do tasks. But how do you make it happen? What do you have to do different?
Well, 1, you have to do it strategically. 2, you have to bring constant awareness to the work. So it's my role is not one, and this is what I talk about when I talk about disruption. It's not one where we see inequities that are occurring in the system and not saying anything about it and not doing anything about it. But it's a way that if you see something that's being done, particularly with students and even adults, because it's an equation, if you will. It's both adults and students that we work to support. But if you let these things happen, you see them, you don't say anything, then you're continuing a systemic problem. So part of disrupting it is always bringing it to awareness and always raising it in each of the contexts that I have an opportunity to do so.
That comes down to an empowerment kind of issue of teachers and whoever else is in the system, when they see something happening, have the power to go talk to somebody and say, hey, this is going on. We got to put a stop to it. Are you the guy that gets the final word that over in school B, there's something going on that we need to sort out? Or is the game that you need to get the principals of schools A, B, and C in line such that they are open to essentially a criticism that the system isn't doing what it's supposed to?
So I don't necessarily, well, so to the direct answer, I think it's a combination of tasks. It's not necessarily getting principals in line, more so than it is making sure that principals have the tools they need to ensure equitable access in their schools. In terms of, do a lot of the issues come in my direction? Yes, they do. Do staff ask for support in dealing with specific issues around race and racism and bias and oppression? Absolutely, which is a part of my role to deal with those types of issues.
How big of a problem is that in Beverly?
Well, I don't think it's, I think the problem is pervasive everywhere. And
yeah, I think we understand that much, yeah.
So, it's an opportunity in my mind to be able to come in because everybody's on a different level. And so it's hard to say that the problem reaches this magnitude in Beverly because everybody has a different experience. Everybody comes with a different experience. Quite honestly, George, another part of my job is to bring people to the table in conversation around race and racism, which is something that we don't do enough of. Mm-hmm. And part of that awareness is looking at race and racism not as a checklist item. You don't solve equity by doing 5 bullet things and then your problem gets solved. But you do it through a strategic process that raises awareness and helps to change mindset. So part of that work is the professional development that we do with all of our staff. So regardless of your level, whether you're a paraprofessional or whether you're an administrator, we have a development cycle that we've kicked into place that addresses issues of implicit and unconscious bias.
Well, what I'm thinking about is the charter that you have for opportunity and access. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be, in my mind, some places where the system could do a better job. One of the things is there used to be, before COVID, a session between the senior center and the high school called Breakfast with Seniors. So it's a home and home series. Sit down over coffee and donuts and chit chat about what's going on. And I met 2 young ladies over the course of that. Both of them wanted to be veterinarians. And one of them, I asked her, well, why didn't you go to Essex Tech? And her answer was she didn't want to leave her friends. Okay, I understand that. The other girl, however, said, I didn't know you could go to college from Essex Tech. So to me, that rings a bell that, wait a minute, there seems to be something missing in the system about understanding um, what's going on with associate schools that we can get people into. And that brings up the other half of the problem of there's a lot of kids that would like to get a vocational education or a hands-on approach to education, and we can't do it because we don't have the facilities here. And I'm interested in um, what does it take, I guess, to bridge that gap between everybody doesn't have to go to college and just hand them a diploma and they walk out the door and lots of luck.
And I'm going to start with a very, very basic response. At the very fundamental level is an understanding of what equity is. And, many people are under the guise, this is collectively as a national rules, that equity is synonymous with access. That if you give every student the same thing, then that's equity, and that's not equity. Equity is giving every student what he or she needs in order to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's what we are working to do. And so when I talked about this equity audit that the district just recently completed, it was developed with that mindset that the equity audit is to raise some of the issues and problems that haven't surfaced prior that need to come to our attention in order to be able to do what you just suggested. Did we attend to the varying needs of all students? And so that's really like the goal of public education now, is to attend to the needs of all students so that they can be best prepared for the futures that they walk into.
Well, how much influence do you have over the curriculum of the system?
Well, I would say that I have some influence. Our curriculum is guided by our district's assistant superintendent, and she and I have consulted. We consult regularly. We talk regularly about curriculum issues and how to ensure that our curriculum is not only rigorous and meaningful to students and relevant, but that it's also done with an equity lens.
Well, as I was getting ready for the discussion today, I was skimming through the email and I came across a question that one of these educational programs puts out. What's the purpose of the K through 12 education in the age of automation? So that gets back to my concern of not necessarily every kid wants to or needs to go to college, but yet not every one of them walks out the door heading for a McDonald's or some other fast food place. So that area in between where we have an awful lot of businesses in the area, they're getting more and more automated. How do we address that in the system?
Well, we've got to change our understanding of the purpose of education. So public education was initially developed as a factory model concept, if you will, where students would come in and learn the same thing at the same time, in the same way every day, and be expected to perform. But as the context of our culture and our system has changed, and the workforce has changed exponentially, we can no longer run our education system like a factory model. We have to take a look at how do we begin to personalize learning for students who have varying needs, who have different experiences, who don't learn in the same way, in the same manner each and every day, but who need other supports in order to make their learning work for them. So that's the first step. We've got to change our mindset and then our practice in terms of how we levy education to students. And so that's one of the things that I was excited about in joining Beverly Public Schools because, I earnestly looked at Beverly as an innovative district. I didn't come to Beverly brand new. I knew something about the district prior to coming to the district. And I knew that Beverly had some of the innovative mindsets and opportunities to be able to do the very things that we're talking about in this conversation. How do you reimagine education? How do you shift it? How do you make it better? How do you not accept the status quo ongoingly? But to really be bold enough to make some inherent changes about the way that we do things and the way that we think about things across the entire education sector.
That's one of the things that gets to me is the demands of the system. Because I remember when I was in high school, took a drafting course, and the whole exercise of the drafting course is learning how to draw a mechanical drawing with pen and ink. And I got a granddaughter who's got a boyfriend in mechanical engineering at UMass Lowell. The first thing he learns to do is how do you program a 3D printer? And so I know the system's got some 3D printers in it, but the issue comes down to how much emphasis is putting on technology, which seems to be the current direction, as opposed to a service industry.
Well, the interesting thing is that we're in a position now, and these are educators across the U.S., where we're training students for jobs that don't even exist. And so part of the challenge is how do you structure a learning program that's robust enough to be able to meet that unforeseen need, if you will, that's going to arise in the next 10 to 20 years. And so I think that's one of the challenges, but certainly with technology being on the rise and really driving how we do things and how our society functions, it's critical that our learning program be technologically astute and focus based to be able to meet those meaningful needs for students and adults.
Yeah, because
so all of that to say, we are in constant evolution, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever an opportunity where, whether it's Beverly Public Schools or any other public school system or any school period, can afford to simply rest on its laurels, if you will. There's always going to be an evolving process, a new way to reimagine education, a new way to learn, a new way to make sure that students get the skills that they need.
Well, one of the things that popped out in my working experience years ago was we ran into a problem with the military that all our tech manuals were written for and by engineers, which is fine. But the guy on the front line that's actually reading the manual to figure out how to fix the helicopter, he's got at best a ninth grade education and ninth grade reading skills. So we had to go through an exercise of having a STAR program, read all our manuals, and point out the areas that had to be rewritten to make them intelligible for a ninth grade level. And the other one that showed up in that really started with the automobile industry, in that every year a new manual comes out with the new car. And the mechanic has to read the new manual to figure out, how do I fix this new car that's got more bells and whistles? So there is a emphasis, I think, that started with the auto industry to send mechanics back to school, not so much to get a better liberal education, but to learn how to learn. And that phrase always stuck with me, is that that's really what you have to do in school, is to learn how to learn, because next time you get a problem, it ain't like anything you saw in class.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And learning is continuous. And so that's part of the messaging, as we work with students. This isn't, just a process where you complete 12 years of school and off you go. But what are the tools that you need to have in your kit in life, period, that are going to make you successful regardless of the area that you go into? Critical thinking skills, being able to rationalize, being able to look at different points of view, being able to consider different perceptions. And so all of these things are important as you talk about really developing the whole student. And so it's the academic piece, yes, but it's also the social emotional elements as well.
So that's where I'm still somewhat confused as to what your real function is, because when you talk about opportunities and access, there has to be something there to access to. And you can talk all the good words about, hey, we ought to do a better job, but unless we have some mechanism for keeping up with what's going on in the world, the system becomes stale and becomes obsolete. And I guess that's what I'm looking for is, I guess you alluded to earlier, the coordination between yourself and the assistant superintendent who is involved in the curriculum. And I guess that's what we really need to have is another show with you and her together, maybe.
Absolutely. We would certainly welcome it.
To talk about access without having a place to go leaves me a little cold.
And so here's the transparent part of the response. Our world is changing racially and culturally.
Yeah.
If we don't help students to address it, they're not going to fare very well in that world. And so it's important to raise these issues and not treat them as something that's just the flavor of the month, if you will. You know, when we talk about opportunity, access, and equity, we're talking about how do we make sure that students don't fall through the cracks? How do we make sure that students have the type of experience that they're going to say, I had a good learning cycle / experience when I was in high school. I was in school collectively, be it elementary, middle, or high school, and we had open and honest conversations about race. Yes, it wasn't a perfect experience, but we were able to talk about the things that are going to help me become a change agent. And that's what we need to think about in terms of our students. So when we talk about opportunity, we're talking about how do we close the gaps? And the reality is when we're talking about gaps, we're talking about dealing with issues of poverty. And there's something about poverty that education has failed at collectively because we don't understand the experience if we've grown up outside of poverty or in another context. And so when we talk about opportunity as it relates to my role, it's how do we make sure that any gaps that are existent that we identify as a district, we begin to address so that all of our students, whether you're white, Black, Asian, Latino, Native American, Native Hawaiian, or any other background or ethnicity, you have the same shots for success as everybody else.
Yeah.
When we talk about access is how do we present those opportunities to students for them to take advantage of. It's not enough to just, send out a communication and say, here, we have this available. And particularly to send it, for example, to families who don't speak English as a primary language. What advantage are we affording and what access are we really providing? So it means that we have to change the way that we interact with our families and change our communication structure. And then, of course, equity, as I mentioned a little earlier, what does every young person need that's going to help them be successful? So I might need something. I might need one thing, but you may need something else.
Yeah.
And how, as a school, do we make sure that even though André and George need two different things, they both get it without being slighted in any way, shape, or form?
Well, we've run out of our half hour, and thank you very much. And without having to ask you, you came up with a very good summary of what's going on. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching us. And if you have some different opinions, again, I very seriously invite you to give me a call, and we will get you on a show, and we'll listen to you too. And Dr. Morgan, thanks for joining us this evening, and we'll have to do this again. There's more to this story.
Oh, absolutely. I look forward to it.